There is a moment when the sun disappears, when darkness falls, and you're left with just your fears. That's the moment you feel your first pang of doubt. That's the moment when the night comes out.
Episode 5, The Hidden Library, Part 1. Libraries are amazing things. They contain volumes upon volumes of knowledge. However, what if you found a library that had more than pages of the past? What if the books looked into things you didn't want to know, or told you things about the people around you? Would you want to know these secrets? You know, the secrets that hide during the day until the time when the night comes out. Vaughn Crandall walked along the river and kept his eyes straight ahead. He was doing his best, really trying this time. The last thing he wanted to do was show his frustration and anger in front of his in-laws, but Judy was over there with them, looking in the window of some antique shop, what felt like the 900th antique shop they had been in since this visit started. Vaughn cracked his neck and shifted from one foot to the other, clearing his throat. Whatever. He and Judy weren't fighting right now, which was the point. She was off with her parents, seemingly happy and distracted. Vaughn could walk around trying to find something he wanted to do with his time. Something to distract him from what was happening to him and Judy. Find anything to amuse him so he could pretend things were fine. There wasn't much here, though. A river bisected the tiny town. Up in the wooded hills on either side of the downtown area were likely homes nestled within subdivisions. But right here were restaurants and souvenir stores, not to mention the line of endless antique stores. How many times could you look at rusted signs from diners and stores, or the same old beat-up furniture? Apparently, you could do so for a long time, as evidenced by the amount of time they had spent inside those stores today. Vaughn paused to look into a window and found himself gazing into a very nice-looking bar with bottles of liquor along the wall. It wasn't quite 11 yet, so the place was closed. He wished it was open. Sitting at the bar with a drink and maybe a burger matched with a pile of French fries seemed like just the perfect thing to help him forget. The long drive to this town just yesterday had frayed his nerves enough. Today, sitting in the car with his in-laws to come to the town of antique stores had caused those nerves to snap off like dried twigs during a drought. He was in the dangerous territory where one word might set him off. Doing so would not improve things with Judy. The bar stools were still up on the bar. The tables shone from the light filtered through the thick windows. A large mirror dominated the back wall behind the bar, reflecting the backs of the liquor bottles. Vaughn studied it almost wistfully. He wasn't even much of a drinker, normally, but today seemed like the kind of day to imbibe. He wondered if these were dangerous thoughts, but decided he didn't really care. Unable to wet his whistle, Vaughn continued down the street. Off to his left and across the road was the restaurant where his wife wanted them all to have lunch. It looked pleasant enough, but the menu was nothing special. He had already studied it online via his phone an hour ago. Plus, the thought of making more small talk with these people gave him stomach cramps. Sighing, his hands in his pockets, Vaughn ambled down the street. The next building appeared to be a real estate office. The building he came to next, however, was at least mildly interesting. A library. Vaughn muttered to himself. It was an old-fashioned-looking library, too. Perhaps it had once been the town courthouse, converted to a new purpose. A long set of marble stairs led up to a brick building with wide, white columns leading to a black wooden door. The door held windows through which he could see the stacks of books and the counter near the front, which was probably where the librarian checked the books in and out. A typical small-town library if there ever had been one, like something out of a painting of rural America from the 50s. If there was one thing Vaughn appreciated, it was books. He had fond memories of being a kid hiding out in the stacks at his local library. Hours spent reading while his mother went shopping, or his parents spent time doing other things when they didn't want him around. For the first time on the trip, Vaughn smiled. "I'm heading up here," he called out toward the general direction of his wife. She cast a quick glance in his direction and raised one hand. This was enough for Vaughn to determine he had permission to move forward. Vaughn climbed the stairs. No one else came up with him, and no one emerged from the library either. All was very quiet around here at the moment. Perhaps not too much going on in the library today. It didn't matter much to him. He pushed the heavy wooden door in, and it creaked in protest as he did. As soon as he was inside, the old, musty smell of books hit his nostrils. It surprised him to see he was actually in a small foyer. It hadn't looked as if there was a second set of doors from the bottom of the stairs. To his left was a brown door and a men's room. To his right appeared to be a community bulletin board and the women's room. He paused to study the postings on the board. Babysitting, lawn mowing, dog walking, all services provided by people from the area. A bulletin about a local church spaghetti dinner, typical of nearly every library in every town. Vaughn smiled again. The inside called to him, so he swung open the interior doors. The full smell of books hit him hard. An old, chipped wooden librarian's counter stood just to the right. There was an ancient, bulky computer monitor filling one end of the desk, its plastic surface covered in various colored Post-it notes. There were stacks of books and more stacks of magazines, probably being checked back in. "Hello there." It was the voice of a woman, pleasant but older. Vaughn turned to see a hunched woman shuffling across the warped hardwood floors. She had a mop of curly red hair on top of her head and walked with a black cane. Next to her was a black Labrador with gray around its muzzle, but a vigorously wagging tail. "Hello there," Vaughn said, slouching out of her way as she strode her way behind the desk and, with great effort, found her way onto a stool behind it. "I'm just visiting here with my wife and in-laws. I saw the library and had to come in. My name's Vaughn, by the way." "Well, welcome. We enjoy having visitors. My name is Dolores, and my four-legged companion is T.S. T.S. cast a glance toward him, sniffed the air before turning around 3 times and laying down on a large dog bed covered in black fur. The dog heaved a mighty sigh as it lay its head down between its paws and promptly appeared to go to sleep. "Do you get many visitors here?" Vaughn asked. "Oh, some days are busier than others," Dolores replied. "Feel free to look around. There's a room near the back with a bunch of historical stuff about this little town, photos and whatnot. I'm sorry you can't really check anything out, especially if you're heading back to wherever you're from, but if you're staying in town, we can probably arrange something. I just have to take good care of this collection." "Not a problem," Vaughn replied. "Thanks, I'll just look around." Dolores set about typing on her ancient computer, slowly, one key at a time. It must take 45 minutes to check out a book in this place. It was sort of endearing. Vaughn was soon lost among the stacks of books, heading toward the back wall. Vaughn had no idea how long he was lost reviewing old books, cracking open their plastic-covered spines and rooting through yellowed paper, but eventually Judy showed up, scaring him when she put her hand on his shoulder. He whirled around to look at her, dropping the book he was holding, and clutched his heart. "Ugh, you scared the shit out of me," he said, bending over to pick up the book and place it back on the shelf. "Are you staying in here the rest of the afternoon?" she asked. "Are we going for lunch yet?" He returned with another question. "What time is it?" Not quite time for lunch yet, just after 10, Judy said while shaking her head. "Typical. You don't pay attention at the time. You can't check anything out. Why are you even in here?" Vaughn smiled. The tension from last night had evaporated for him. Their arguments during the long drive had receded from his mind as he walked around the library. "Look at this place. It's fantastic," he said. Judy looked around for a moment, then shrugged. "It's a library," she said. "Fine, just stay in here. Can you try to keep track of the time? Meet us over at the restaurant at 11:30. He nodded. Yes, fine. How are they doing? You guys having fun? Yes, Judy replied. We're having a great time. Mom wants to look at a couple more shops. We need to find something to put in the one corner of the kitchen, the one by the window. Vaughn had no clue what she meant. All the corners were the same as far as he could recall, but he didn't want to start another fight. He nodded instead. Okay, watch the time. She did not lean in for a kiss. Instead, she turned and walked off. Vaughn watched her go, even smiled as she scratched the dog behind the ears. He felt love in his heart for her, but also this sadness. So much sadness between them lately, and it was so hard to put a finger on why. Those were the moments when Vaughn could pretend all was right with his marriage. It was tempting to blame it all on Judy, but it was just as much his fault. They had started out fighting about everything, then slowly drifted apart. Yesterday's adventure in the car had started out positive, but as the miles went on and they got bored, the nerves had frayed to the breaking point. When Vaughn had insisted they needed to stop at a rest stop to wait out a thunderstorm, and Judy had argued against it, things escalated quickly. By the end, they were standing in the parking lot of the rest stop screaming at each other, neither making any points worth noting, while lightning flashed around them and thunder rolled in the distance. The smell of rain filled the air. The rest of the drive, an additional 2 grueling hours, they sat mostly in silence. Vaughn drove as the rain pelted them, almost wishing he'd skid off the road just to prove a point. Vaughn looked down at his feet and sighed again. They had been so in love at one point and still had moments. When had things changed? Probably when they both had troubles at work, which they soon brought home. They tried to pull out of the nosedive repeatedly. Vaughn still held out hope they could save the craft and the passengers. Now was not the time to think about it, though. There was no way he could come up with a solution to save his marriage right here in the library. Instead, he looked at the shelves, continued his walk, got lost in the library. He eventually got to the Historic Center. It wasn't much bigger than a closet, but the historic photos on the walls were fascinating. There were books under glass with signatures in them which must have meant something to the town or area, but Vaughn recognized nothing. He meandered around for a while longer yet. When he looked at his watch, it was nearing 11, and he figured he should make his way back up to the front. Vaughn paused to check a few more books, but eventually he found himself at the front again. Dolores still sat at her computer, with T.S. still sound asleep with his nose between his paws. "Thanks for letting me browse," he said. "Gotta meet the rest of the family for lunch." Dolores looked up and smiled. "Thanks for stopping by. Things get slow here during the summer. Kids come use this place to write their papers and stuff during the school year. Plus, people head out of town. It's nice to have some company." "Glad to oblige," Vaughn said, and he raised his hand in a friendly gesture. Dolores returned to her computer, and Vaughn headed for the door. He knew it would be hot outside by now and was bracing himself for the blast of heat as he pushed his way through the inner doors. Already, the foyer area felt warm. His intent was to just walk past the restrooms and the bulletin board to head across the street. Something stopped him. The door set into the wall, closed when he first came in, now stood wide open. For an instant, Vaughn was sure he saw movement within the shadows beyond the door, just a quick dash of something roughly the height of a human, but little more than a shadow. Vaughn was sure this was nothing. At least, this is what his brain told him. There was nothing here, nothing to see. Just go, just run across the street, go have lunch. But something else inside his head told him he needed to at least peek into the open door and see what was there. "You like books?" Vaughn nearly jumped out of his shoes. The voice came from the darkness. He couldn't see who was there, of course, nor make out if the voice was male or female. It broke and cracked as it spoke, sounding ancient. For some reason, Vaughn thought of an anthropomorphic turtle with glasses perched on the end of its nose. "Yes," Vaughn replied. "Well, you should come up here," the voice said. It was filled with good humor, or so Vaughn thought, but still, no one came into view.
There are books up here you will see nowhere else.
Who are you?
Well, I'm a librarian. Now, come upstairs and stop asking dumb questions.
There was the sound of shuffling feet heading up a flight of stairs. Slowly but steadily. Vaughn laughed, looked around. This was a joke, right? This was something the townspeople played on the new folks in town, right? He looked back through the inner door and saw Dolores still sitting behind the desk.
Are you coming?
The voice was higher up, further away. Old, but spry, it seemed. Vaughn cast one more glance out the front window, saw his wife and in-laws heading toward the restaurant. He wouldn't have much time. He had always been the curious type. Sometimes he had wished he could solve a mystery or become a detective. He also devoured true crime podcasts and books. Now, here was a real mystery in front of him. Laughing to himself and sure this was all going to be a huge prank, Vaughn stepped through the door into the shadows. Almost immediately, the darkness overtook him, and he felt an odd buzzing sensation in the back of his head. For a fraction of an instant, it was as if the entire planet tipped on its axis. Vaughn shook his head to clear it, and the sensation passed. In front of him was a set of stairs. They led up to a landing, and a doorway stood off to the right at the top. He couldn't see what was going on within the room. The air was musty. Near the top of the stairs, set high in the wall, were windows, which cast an eerie yellowish glow. Vaughn headed up the stairs. The atmosphere was thick, like trying to breathe on a very hot and humid day. He got to the top of the stairs and turned right. Through the doorway was a small room with what appeared to be a marble floor. At the far end of the room was a long counter, much like the one downstairs, but longer. Behind this was a man with red hair, again, like downstairs, but hunched over as if carrying a heavy weight on his shoulders. He had small, round glasses perched on the end of his long nose.
Well, hello. There you are.
Vaughn stared at the man, and something happened. For a moment, the area behind the man swirled and shimmered as if it were a hologram. There was a large empty space behind the man, dark, but with what looked like the edges of bookshelves just barely peeking out into the light. For an instant, the image flickered, and Vaughn had the image of a vast, infinite space. Shelves upon shelves upon shelves crammed with books. Then the image was gone, and it was just a space hidden in shadows. "What is this place?" he asked.
Well, that's a hard question to answer,
The old man said.
My name is Abe. I've been here for a long time now. I monitor Dolores below there. Well, it's Dolores down there now, but there have been others. I keep an eye on those who come in and out and who walk past the place. Sometimes there are people who grab my attention. I invite them into this hidden library.
Vaughn stepped into the outer room. He looked around. There were strange murals on the walls and ceiling, scenes from both human history and legend. Demons dancing with angels and men fighting with men. A large depiction of Cain and Abel dominated the ceiling. There were no bookshelves in here, no bulletin boards, nothing you might find in a standard library lobby. This doesn't look like any library I've ever seen, Vaughn said. And why would there be a hidden library in a place like this little town?
Why not a place like this?
Abe replied. I don't understand any of this. Abe shook his head and smiled. Once again, the image flickered, and Vaughn saw something else sitting behind the counter besides an old man. Something huge with claws and a bent back, a kind of creature with large teeth and slit eyes like a cat. Then it was gone, and there was just Abe, hunched as ever. The old man adjusted the glasses on the end of his nose.
Why not here? In a little place like this, you can select those you invite into the secret, of course. A selective clientele. You set up a place like this in New York and you get overwhelmed by 1,000 people, 1,000,000. It's impossible to find just the right person amongst all the static and noise.
What's the right person?
You are, of course.
Vaughn stepped further into the room. The buzzing entered his head again, and once again the air felt thick. Despite the odd drunken feeling, he felt compelled to walk further into the room. He had to approach Abe. For the moment, Judy and the in-laws were far from his mind. Why am I the person you want? Abe smiled. The edges of his mouth caused his entire face to turn into a mass of wrinkles.
You need knowledge. You seek knowledge. Plus, there are things you think you know which you do not, or things you should know which you do not. There are many reasons, dozens of them, and we can eventually discuss them all. But let's start with those.
I don't understand.
No, you don't. But you will.
Abe stood up taller for a moment and extended his arms. Behind him, a light flickered on, and now the room behind him came into full view. Gray walls and ceiling, but the walls extended further and further into the background and then out of view. Metal bookshelves stood at attention, extending just as far into eternity as the walls and ceiling. Each shelf was lined with books without titles, of varying sizes, layer upon layer of shelving going on and on forever. What? Vaughn gasped. His mouth hung open.
This is the library, Vaughn,
Abe said, turning around to admire his handiwork.
The ultimate library. The library which has all the knowledge there ever was and ever could be.
What are all of those books? Vaughn whispered. What are they?
I could tell you, but it would be easier to show you,
Abe said, shuffling further down the counter. He stared at the bookshelves behind him.
Think of a person.
What?
Think of a person.
Abe repeated slowly.
Anyone but yourself. Think of any person alive or dead.
Without meaning to, Vaughn thought of his mother. He could, for an instant, see her clearly in his mind, sitting in her chair back in her one-bedroom apartment, the place she sat since his father died. He could see her holding the remote in her hand, watching game shows on TV.
A fine choice,
Abe said, and then he clapped his hands. To Vaughn's amazement, the shelves behind him began to move. The spines of the books began to swirl and spin around their shelves. It reminded Vaughn of seeing all of the clothes wrapped in plastic, hanging from hooks, spinning around in a dry cleaner's. It was the only comparison he could come up with. A moment later, a single book suddenly spat itself from the top shelf. Abe extended both hands, and the book slowly tumbled from the shelf to rest in his palms. He turned a moment later, the smile back on his face, and the glasses shining at the end of his nose with an internal fire. For a moment, Vaughn saw flames reflected in his lenses.
Come over here,
he said, setting the book down on the counter.
Come look at this.
Vaughn walked slowly across the floor, his feet echoing against the walls. The wood cracked beneath his shoes. He approached the book, which seemed to breathe as he got closer, bigger and then thinner. Vaughn gasped again as he got close to the counter and saw what was embossed across the front of the book. That's my mother's name, he said quietly.
Yes, this is her book.
I don't...
Open it.
Vaughn reached for the book with shaking hands. His fingers brushed against the book and felt the bumps and ridges from the material. There was a soft feeling of electricity there, too, a tingling through the pads of his fingertips. He gripped the edge of the cover and slowly pulled it back. Words. Thousands upon thousands of words across the pages. It took Vaughn a moment to actually digest what he was looking at. The words seemed like a jumble at first. Then they began to coalesce into sentences. However, they still didn't make much sense. It seemed like a book filled with random sentences without any coherent story. I don't understand this, Vaughn said. None of this makes any sense. Why do you have a nonsense book about my mother? Abe leaned forward, pointed one twisted finger at the words.
You're trying too hard. You have to relax and let your brain decipher what's there. Have you ever heard of the writing stream of consciousness? This is the ultimate version of that. But if you relax and stop trying so hard, your brain will sort it out and it will start making sense.
Abe reached his finger up and touched Vaughn's forehead. There was a bright flash behind Vaughn's eyes and he blinked. It was like a firecracker went off in his brain for an instant, and then he looked down at the book. Slowly, the words started to make more sense. Yes, they were starting to make sense. This was a page from when his mother was a teenager. She was in her bedroom, pining away for some boy named Hank in her class. He was so handsome, and she wondered what it would be like to kiss him. Vaughn turned a page. Now Mom was on a road trip with the rest of her family. She was bored, staring out the window, wishing she was back home. If she were home, she'd have had the house to herself, and maybe she could invite Hank over. Maybe he would come, but he might not. They had been talking the last few days. He flipped more pages. Mom was in her 20s now. She was in college and hanging with her friends. They were planning to go to a party. She was wondering what she would wear. He flipped again. Now she was on a date with his father, Chris. He was so handsome and so smart. She loved him completely, and she hoped he might ask her to marry him. She would say yes without hesitation. She knew this was the man she wanted to be with for the rest of her life. She wondered what it would be like to crawl into bed with him and what he... Vaughn quickly flipped the page. He didn't need to see more of that. "Is this a diary?" Vaughn asked, his concern rising. "What did you do? Did you steal my mom's diary?" Abe laughed. It was a weird, twisted laugh, which started out sounding like an old man in a small town, then got deeper and more guttural, before turning back into an old man laugh. Vaughn tore his eyes away from the book, had the moment where reality seemed to flicker and the room around him changed, but it was so quick he couldn't make out details. Abe's face was red from laughing, his cheeks like red apples on either side of his long nose. Had his nose gotten longer?
No, you still don't get it, do you? No one ever does when they first come in here, though, so don't feel too bad. These aren't diaries, per se. They're thoughts. Books filled with thoughts. Look, turn to the last pages there.
Vaughn's head felt fuzzy again. Was the air thicker in here? Was there a strange burning smell, too? He flipped the book to the last pages. At first, there was just a blank page. Then, as if an invisible pen in an invisible hand were writing, words began to appear. Like before, first it was just a jumble of words, but then it began to cohere into sentences. "I wonder what Vaughn is doing. He hasn't called me in a while. Oh well, I hope he and Judy can stop by soon. What should I have for dinner tonight? I think I need to head to the store. Is my TV show on tonight or is it tomorrow? Oh, I can't keep anything straight anymore. I worry about being in this apartment by myself these days. I hate having to be here, and that he died. Why did he have to do that to himself? Now I'm here and no one I know is around. Oh, I hate him. No, I love him. I always will. Now, what about dinner?" It continued on like this, an endless stream of thoughts appearing slowly, a letter, then a word at a time. Soon it filled the page. There was an odd sensation in Vaughn's fingers, and to his surprise, now there was a new page. He flipped to it, and the words began to appear there too, just on and on. "Is this my mom's thoughts?" Vaughn whispered, in a weird mix of awe and pure terror. He looked up at Abe and expected the man to appear like some demon, but he was just an old man, smiling. "Is that what this is?"
It takes you a while, but you do eventually catch on, don't you?
Abe laughed and clapped his hands.
Yes, this is a very special library, filled with very special books.
"How is this possible?" Vaughn asked. "Is there a book for me?"
Of course there is,
Abe replied.
Everyone who is and ever was. Remember all of those times teachers in your religious schools told you even your thoughts were known? Well, here it is. All of human thought recorded in these books. Every dirty secret, every invention, every sexual thought or thought of murder. Everything right here. Wanna see another one?
Vaughn felt sick to his stomach. The world felt as if it were tipping crazily on its axis again. He staggered to the right just a bit. I don't think this is real, he said.
Oh, it's real,
Abe replied.
You just don't want to accept it. Right now, your book is filling with thoughts about how you've gone crazy or I'm crazy. Some part of you wants to believe this is all a hallucination, perhaps a dream. Oh, by the way, we record those too. So many dreams. All of the ones you ever forgot, recorded here in these books. Want to see what the president is thinking? How about your favorite actor or actress? The girl you had such a crush on when you were 15, maybe? You can find out every place she's been, every man or woman she was with since then, and what she's doing right now.
I need to go, Vaughn said, his voice weak. I need to leave. This is utterly insane. Why would you bring me into this nightmare? Abe just smiled.
Oh, there are many reasons, but the fact is I'm searching just like you. Searching for someone to take over this job. I've been doing it for a very long time now.
You're insane. This is all insane. I've lost my mind.
You wouldn't be the first to do so. It's part of the problem, you see. There's much more back here than your mom's sex life as a teenager. Darker things by far, and things which, well, let's just say most men cannot handle. It takes a very special mind, a special person.
Vaughn turned his head to make sure the door was still there. It was.
Yes, you can leave if you want, but keep this in mind. The hidden library isn't always there. It moves. I move. Even I can't control it, but I know I'll be here for a little while longer.
Abe leaned in closer, then reached out and touched Vaughn's hand.
Take a look at a few more,
Abe said, with a glint in his eye.
Maybe someone not so close to you. Think again. Relax. Think again.
In an instant, Vaughn thought of the Oval Office. He could picture it in his mind, having seen it in movies and on television so many times. He could even picture the president sitting behind the desk.
Another good choice,
Abe said approvingly.
Maybe a bit predictable, but nice.
Abe extended a hand, and the book spun around and around again. Then, near the top shelf, one book twisted off and into the air. Slowly, like a leaf on the breeze, it came to rest in front of Abe.
There you go,
he said. Vaughn opened the book. There was the swirl of words which slowly grew into focus. The earliest thoughts of the man who ran the free world. Thoughts of him as a child, wanting to be a fireman. Then thoughts of him in school, frustrated over a math quiz. Then he was in high school, running for class president and doing well in debate. Then running for a local office, working his way up. He turned the pages slowly, then gripped the book, flipping toward the end. Now he saw the thoughts of the man during the election process. A man so changed it was hard to read. Vicious, willing to find the dirtiest hidden secret of his opponent and putting it out there. Then there were thoughts about using campaign funds for personal things, crossing the lines and accepting donations from people he should not, accepting information about opponents from foreign entities. Finally, there was election night. The celebrations, the victory of inauguration, then settling down into the role, the mundane things of endless meetings and phone calls. But hidden near the end, thoughts of assassinating other world leaders, using drones to kill off opponents in other countries and wondering if he could use them on opponents in this country. Violent thoughts against the media, the opposing party, senators, and representatives. Jesus, Vaughn said.
It happens nearly every time,
Abe said, shaking his head.
The power gets to them. It's a drug, you see. Getting power makes you want more power. Then you want to keep power. They all start out with good intentions, even noble intentions, but they all turn out to be schemers and potential killers. In fact, you want to see real corruption? Look at this one.
The book spun again, and another book floated down. When Vaughn stared at the cover, he gasped. The Pope? He said. Really? The pages opened and flew past on their own. Vaughn saw the thoughts of a young man with a deep devotion to God, the decision to go into the priesthood, the years spent running one congregation after another, the temptations, the resistance, then the growth of power rising among the ranks, the corruption which came with it, moving priests around when the scandals erupted. Near the back, the election from the cardinals elevating him to pope. Then the realization how many looked to him as a leader. The doubts, the realization maybe God wasn't up there, and this was all just him and his decisions. The endless tediousness of the job, running the tiny country of the Vatican, but trying to hold on to the idea he was the spiritual leader for millions. Thoughts of suicide, worry about those who might want to kill him.
So much doubt, Abe said. So much worry about what he is doing and whether or not any of it matters. Of course, none of it does. But it's the religious who wonder if these books exist. They think God or Jesus sits here and watches the words as they come, but no. Just me. Just whomever runs the hidden library. All here. Recorded.
But for whom? Vaughn asked.
You think I know?
Abe said.
You think I have knowledge when I do not. Yes, I can read the thoughts of anyone who has ever lived or is living, but I don't know what the use of this library is. I just exist here. There are others and other branches also existing. What purpose this serves, I do not know. Like a mouse living in a car factory. It knows something is happening and it can see things going on, but the purpose of all the activity is elusive. The religious believe there will eventually be an accounting. Perhaps one day, someone will come to read all of this and make a judgment.
Abe shrugged. I still don't understand why I'm here, Vaughn said. I still don't think this is real.
It's always the same,
Abe sighed.
I thought the same thing. None of this is real. Imagine me standing where you are centuries ago. Let's put these away.
Abe waved his hand, and the 2 books on the counter flew away and back into the shuffling madness of those books spinning around on the shelves behind him. Vaughn watched the millions, billions of books spinning around and around. Gray-colored books with nothing written on the spines were indicative of what they were. Vaughn wondered what his book looked like.
Sometimes you just get a feeling about a person,
Abe said.
I saw you interact with Dolores. I saw you browsing those books and you talking to your wife. I got a feeling you were meant for something else, Vaughn. We're looking to expand. Perhaps you could be a librarian.
Vaughn shook his head. I can't. No way. Abe nodded.
Well, you've looked at your mother and perhaps 2 of the most powerful people in the world. But there may be things closer to home you want to know. You should see the full power of the library before you decide.
Abe stood up and stared at the books on the shelves behind him. He seemed satisfied and then waved his hand. The room behind the counter went dark. When he turned around, his eyes flashed gold and then red.
There may be things you decide you want to know. Things about those close to you, or whom you think are close to you. But you can leave if you want to. I can sense your desire to run.
Abe leaned back, stared at Vaughn for a moment. Vaughn got the distinct feeling he was being scanned, his mind read.
Watch your wife, Vaughn,
the old man said.
Watch close.
There was a small irony in the fact Judy and Vaughn had met in a library at the very start of their relationship. They both attended the same college and were in their senior years when this woman with an armful of books staggered past the table where Vaughn was also buried in his studies. When she bumped into the table and a stack of books fell in his lap, Vaughn let out a yelp of surprise, but then stood up to help this beautiful blonde woman find a seat. The seat right across from Vaughn, of course. Vaughn had seen Judy in some of his classes. He had always thought she was gorgeous, with her striking blue eyes and long hair. She had the perfect face, in his opinion. Slightly round, with a hint of a chin, perfectly rounded nose. She had a habit of tilting her head down while gazing up at people with her eyes and a mischievous grin on her lips. He had studied those lips many times from across the classroom and wondered what they would be like to kiss. However, he was shy and certain she had a boyfriend. Here she was now, sitting across from him. She was studying to become an English major with a minor in journalism. He was finishing up his degree in business with an emphasis on marketing. During the course of their 4 years, he had taken many writing courses, and she had as well. Once they had even ended up in a fiction writing class where he watched her read the works of fiction she created. Once she was sitting across from him, it was Judy who started talking. It turned out she had noticed him too in the fiction writing class. Although he wrote dark, creepy stories, she was a fan and admired his ability to tell a tale. Before long, they were forgetting their studies and the papers they were trying to write, and whispering feverishly to each other. In fact, they got so lost in their conversation, the librarian finally asked them to leave due to noise complaints. Giggling and laughing, they gathered their books, checked out, and headed to the campus diner, where they continued talking long into the night. It turned out Judy had an apartment just off campus. Vaughn still resided in the dorms. As the night wore on, and even the diner was closing, they held hands across the table. She invited him back. He accepted. They held each other during the night, not having sex, but sleeping and talking. It was a magical night, and one of Vaughn's core memories of her. Seeing her in the morning light and brushing the long lock of hair from out of her face to see her eyes, and the smile focused just on him. From that moment on, they were together a lot. When they graduated, Vaughn decided to stay in the city where the college was and where Judy had gotten her first job. He found work in other areas than his major until they decided to get married, and together they made the decision to move back to the big city up north. They had talked about having children, but were always lost in their careers. They both agreed during a long discussion one night they were not meant to be parents. Their own parents didn't understand, but they were certain. Now here they were, the walls between built up as mysteriously as a thief in the night. Vaughn picked at the salad in front of him. He'd kept his head down and moved the food around his plate for most of the interminable hour they had been sitting at the table. Judy and her parents chatted away and, from time to time, seemed to remember he was there in order to ask him a question. So far, he seemed to have answered them all correctly as they kept talking, but he had no clue what replies he gave. Not long after Abe gave his warning, he had run, pummeling his way down the stairs and out the door into the sunlight. To his surprise, his wife and in-laws were still just standing in front of the restaurant where he had seen them before entering the hidden library. In fact, for a moment, it was as if all the world were on pause. Birds appeared frozen in midair. The wind blew trees, which were bent in response, but no leaves rustled. It was a fraction of a second, but long enough for his brain to register the anomaly. Then the world snapped into play again, and his wife turned to see him bolt out of the library. "What's the rush?" she asked, giving him a mildly concerned, mostly irritated look. Vaughn stopped in front of them, his heart hammering, his head buzzing once more, trying his hardest to look like he knew what the holy fuck was going on. He hoped the sheer terror he was feeling was not clear on his face. He was very sure he was losing his mind. Did it show? "I thought I was late," he said, then tried on a smile which felt as fake as a mask. His in-laws smiled back, so it must have been a good charade. "Sorry, I looked at the time and thought I was late." Judy actually smiled, then put her arm in his. "No, right on time. Let's get lunch." They walked inside. The cold air in the restaurant was like a slap in the face or a bucket of cold water dumped on his head. Vaughn reached up and wiped his face, and his hand came away soaked with sweat. Was he having a heart attack? He cast a glance back over his shoulder at the library. It was just the library. No sign there was a door with a hidden library from here. No windows on the top floor or any indication there was a second floor with anything in it from across the street. Once they sat down and ordered, Judy and her parents immediately began talking to each other as if Vaughn wasn't even there. At first, just after they gave their food orders, He tried to follow along with the conversation, but his eyes kept glancing sideways to the library across the street. Abe did not come running out, but he couldn't shake the feeling he was being watched. There was a constant itch at the base of his skull, which made him twitch and rub at the back of his neck. He was soon staring at his hands, then the table, then at his food. "Hey, where are you?" Vaughn looked up and smiled at Judy. "Sorry, distracted, I guess. Tired." "Well, can you try entertaining my folks for a bit? I have to go make a phone call." "Who do you have to call?" "It's a business thing. Work." She replied, a mild look of irritation crossing her face. Her phone was already in her hand. "I'll be right back." For some reason, this snapped Vaughn back into reality. It was a Saturday. They both took vacation time from their respective jobs on Friday and through the following week. This made no sense. "What work thing?" he asked, aware his in-laws were staring at them. "It's Saturday. Why would work be calling you?" Now Judy looked really annoyed. She cast a side eye towards her parents. "What's your problem?" she asked through clenched teeth. "You know I have work on the weekends sometimes. It's just part of the job. I'm the only one who can do what I do." Vaughn wanted to keep arguing, but he can already tell she dropped back into a defensive mode. If he kept pushing, this would blow up into a full-fledged argument. She's done it before, calling him out in front of waiters or cashiers at the grocery store. When the red haze falls over her eyes, all she sees is red and doesn't care about the collateral damage. "Fine," he said. "Don't take too long." Judy smiled and walked off then. He watched her go, out the door and into the parking lot, the phone already up to her ear. He watched her out of the corner of his eye as she paced back and forth the way she did when she called people. "So, how are things going at work with you, Vaughn?" his father-in-law asked. No response from Vaughn, not even an indication he had heard. "Vaughn?" he asked again. He snapped his head around and looked his father-in-law in the face. "Sorry, Ned, my brain is just elsewhere today. Things are fine. Busy, always too much to do." He was soon lost in a conversation about running the marketing department of a major travel company. He talked about the press relations, writing press releases, media relations. The entire time he talked, his eyes darted to the right. He saw Judy pace back and forth, still talking. It looked like an intense conversation by her expression. Several times, Vaughn had to ask his in-laws to repeat themselves, but not enough to seem totally lost. Still, his eyes darted to the right. Just as he was about to go out there and ask her what the fuck she was doing, he saw her shut off the call by pressing the disconnect spot on her touchscreen. Then, there was a moment when she pressed the edge of the phone to her lower lip and smiled. It was a warm smile. The kind of smile she had given him when they were first dating, and he imagined she gave when they finished their phone conversations in those years gone by. She paused for just a moment, as if not wanting the call and that moment to end. Then her face cleared, and Judy walked back into the restaurant. Vaughn felt his stomach twist, and his heart hammered like a fist in his chest. "Goddamn," he whispered. "What was that?" his mother-in-law asked. "Sorry, nothing," he said. "Sorry, what did you ask me?" His mother-in-law repeated herself, but Vaughn still didn't hear a word she said. He watched his wife enter the restaurant, stuffing her phone into her purse, and walk back to the table. Moments before she got to her chair, he saw her put on a fake smile. "Sorry," she said. "Took longer than I thought." "Everything okay at work?" her mother asked. "Fine," Judy replied. "Just a few papers got misfiled. They have to scan them in now, but they missed a few pages." Whatever question his mother-in-law had asked was now forgotten. The three of them were soon deep within a new conversation, and the steady drone of their voices washed over him again. Vaughn gritted his teeth, grabbed his napkin, and began twisting the ends around his fingers. He kept replaying the smile over and over again in his head. Call over, pause, edge of phone to lips. then the smile. He compared it to the fake smile he saw when she got to the table. God damn, he thought over and over again, the napkin twisting around and around his fingers. God damn. When lunch was over, Vaughn looked across the street and felt a strange pull to the building. He wanted to run over there, pound his way up the hidden stairs, and demand Abe to give him the book containing his wife's thoughts. It was nearly irresistible. Funny, he thought, how fast the mind could work. Had anyone told him this morning he'd end up in a bizarre hidden room talking to a mysterious old man who was likely not actually an old man, and discover there's a room containing books for every person who ever lived with their thoughts inside, he'd have said they were nuts. He would have been the first to call the police to come get the raving lunatic off his property. Now, his brain had not only already accepted the entire experience was true, but he was sure he needed it to find out what his wife was up to. He managed to keep the small talk going without being remotely engaged. Instead, his mind wandered back to things which had happened regarding his wife over the past few months. The dinners after work, which had never occurred before, or the lunches on the weekend happening at a very increased rate, the aloofness displayed. Had there been other strange, private phone calls of late? He wasn't sure, but thought there might have been. Vaughn didn't know about the people Judy worked with. He had never been to a team outing or even met them. She had mentioned some guys in conversation, but never so longingly or lovingly he felt he had to worry. Was her saying this call was work-related a sign she was sleeping with a guy from there? There were ex-boyfriends, of course. Vaughn knew about the guys she had dated before they met. One of them was a very serious relationship, too. Her folks thought she would marry that guy when things suddenly went south. It took her family a few months to figure out Vaughn was for real, and they were really a couple. Judy had a nasty habit, at least in his opinion, of maintaining a friendly relationship with guys she had dated. She was still social media friends with the prior serious guy. They messaged each other privately much more than Vaughn ever felt comfortable with. You okay? Vaughn snapped back to reality. He turned and saw Judy staring at him. He smiled and patted her hand. Just tired, he said. The drive yesterday really wore me out, I guess. I always have trouble sleeping in an unfamiliar bed, you know? Judy nodded. I do. You're not still upset with me about yesterday? He was, but he didn't want her to know. No, it was nothing. We were both just tired and the drive made us cranky. I'm fine. Judy reached out her hand and put it across his own. Her fingers entwined around his fingers. He squeezed back, but saw a quick look of pain and concern cross her face because he squeezed harder than intended. Vaughn released his grip a little, but felt a bit of satisfaction at the same time. They arrived at her parents' house, and Vaughn excused himself to head upstairs to their bedroom. When Judy gave him a strange look, he assured her he was just tired. He wanted to take a nap. He listened for a moment while on the stairs as his in-laws and his wife sat around the dining room table. Before long, he knew they would sit out on the back porch, watching the afternoon as it turned into dusk. The trees back there were huge, ancient, creating natural shade which made even hot summer days cooler. They abutted a forest, too, adding to the allure of the yard and home. He walked into the bedroom and kicked off his shoes. The hardwood floors creaked loudly when he wore his shoes. Once up there, he paced back and forth from the window along one wall to the small window in the wall opposite. He wrung his hands, twisting his fingers around and around each other. He had to be wrong, had to be crazy. These were the two thoughts which kept twisting around as much as his fingers. He had not seen the room. There was no hidden room at the library. None. It was impossible. The very idea was ludicrous. A hidden library manned by a demonic old man who provided books with people's thoughts in them? How crazy. He was losing it. Vaughn worked hard back in the real world. It was hard for them to find time off together to come visit her parents or do any traveling. He was always stressed, too, worrying about this and then the other thing. He had been this way most of his life. Vaughn got results from the work he did, but It took a toll on his mind from time to time. Twice in his adult life, he had had an official mental breakdown. Once, he had tried to kill himself. Was it happening again? He had just finished a major ad campaign, and it had required lots of extra work and weekends. He was tired, and part of why they had come here was so he could try and relax. Needless to say, the last thing he wanted to do was relax. So if you thought about everything he had been through this afternoon, nothing made any sense. Abe did not make sense. Even if Abe were real, his reasoning for revealing himself to Vaughn made no sense. Why show him these things? Why? The world worked in a certain way, and hidden libraries with books of people's thoughts was not how the world worked. Vaughn sat down on the edge of the bed and looked down at his stocking feet. The next thought was about Judy. Was Judy messing around behind his back? Was there something going on? The other question was, would proof of one be proof of the other? If he could find out Judy was having an affair, would it prove Abe was real and the hidden library was right? One thing was certain. He had to find out if Judy was having an affair. There were two ways he could do so. The first, he could come up with an excuse, head back to town, and see if Abe could get him his wife's book. Even then, he'd need additional confirmation. Second, he could wait until Judy fell asleep and take a look at her phone. He was pretty sure she had not password protected it yet. He lay down on the bed for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The afternoon sunlight played across it, the shadows of the trees waving at him. The window next to the bed was open, the air cool. Birds chirped outside playfully. Any other time, this would have been the perfect day. Today, it all felt fake. At some point, he dozed off. When he awoke suddenly from a dream where he was being chased by something he couldn't see, the light on the ceiling had changed. The breeze was cooler. He looked outside and saw clouds had rolled in. When he looked at his watch, he had only been asleep for 45 minutes. Not long. He could hear Judy talking downstairs and the sound of plates moving around. Vaughn put his feet on the floor. His head felt dizzy, fuzzy again. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow move to the right. Something huge and with gnarled fingers tipped in claws. When he turned his head, the shadow vanished, and he realized it was the shadow of a tree with its branches forming fingers and talons. In his head, though, he was sure he heard Abe laughing. He stood up, headed downstairs after putting on his shoes. The tingling sensation in his head continued. As he walked down the steps, the sensation seemed more like something tugging at his brain. "Hey, sleepyhead," Judy said when he reached the bottom of the stairs. "Hi there," he said. "What's up in here?" "Just getting dinner ready," Judy said, coming over to him and touching his face. "You feeling okay? Did you get some rest?" He put his hand on her own and pulled it away from his cheek. "I still have a bit of a headache. Hey, I think I need to go into town and get some aspirin." Judy looked confused. "I'm pretty sure Mom has aspirin somewhere around here." "You know I can only take that one brand, with the caffeine in it," he replied. Judy's confusion just seemed to grow. "I bet she has some of that, too. What's wrong with you?" "Just my head," he replied. "I'm going to head into town. Where are the car keys?" "In my purse?" Judy said, but now she looked irritated. "We're going to eat soon. Don't be late." Vaughn smiled, hoping it looked better from Judy's side of things than it felt on his face. He leaned in and kissed her. "I'll be right back, promise." Judy's face said she wasn't buying anything he was saying, but he stopped in the living room, found her keys, and headed out the door. He was in the car a moment later with the engine running. Time had stopped. As Vaughn headed down the winding, twisting roads toward the library, he remembered how things seemed frozen. His wife and in-laws had been in the same place and position they had been in when he went into the hidden room. Time had seemed frozen when he came back out and then sped up to the present. What the fuck is going on? He asked the car. To drown out his own thoughts, he turned on the radio, found the rock station. It didn't quite drown out his thoughts, but it helped drown out the buzzing sensation. 10 minutes later, he pulled into a parking space across the street from the library. Overhead, the clouds had gotten darker, the wind stronger. There was the distinct smell of rain in the air. As he crossed the street, noticing the families up and down the street looking for cover, he heard the distant rumble of thunder. Vaughn trotted up the stairs and through the outer door. The light within the library beyond the foyer was dimmer than before, just a few lights on. He couldn't see anyone there, but didn't care. He turned left and tried the doorknob for the entrance on the left. It turned immediately, and he stepped inside. Just as before, there was the sensation of the world tipping wildly on its axis for a moment. The air got thick. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, holding on to the handrail.
I thought you'd be back.
A voice echoed from atop the stairs.
Come on up, Vaughn.
It was Abe's voice, but somehow different. Not quite so old, perhaps? Despite the difference in tone, Vaughn knew for certain it was him, waiting up there like a spider in the center of its web. Vaughn headed up the stairs, reaching the top and turning right. As he crossed into the room with the librarian counter, he noticed the murals had changed. These new images were more violent, also more vibrant and real. A painting of John the Baptist's head on a silver platter presented to a woman. Across the way, on the other side, a painting from the French Revolution perhaps, with a man holding up a bloody head on top of a scaffolding. He did not see Abe. "Abe?" he cried out. "Are you here? I heard your voice." There was a disorienting moment where the shadows around the room moved and undulated as if alive, like a dark ocean casting black beams of light across the walls. Then, from within the dark room behind the counter, Abe stepped out. Only this was a much younger man, perhaps a man in his late 30s or early 40s. He wore a dark pinstriped suit with a purple tie. His hair was mostly black, but dusted with gray, and he wore no glasses.
Good to see you again, Vaughn,
he said.
How can I help you?
Vaughn stared at the man with wide eyes. What happened to you? Abe laughed and looked down at himself, his arms wide.
Don't like the suit? I can change it.
No sooner had he said so than the suit shimmered and swam around his body. When it stopped, he was now in a blue suit with a black shirt and red tie.
Better?
Vaughn opened and closed his mouth like a fish. The words would not come out, but it felt as if his eyes might pop from within his skull, perhaps to roll around on the floor like forgotten marbles.
I bet you're wondering who or what I am, right?
Abe asked.
Well, it's hard to define and answer that particular question. This is usually where people wonder if I'm a demon or Satan himself. The answer is much more complicated. Things are never as black and white as everyone wants to pretend they are they? There's shades of gray. You can call me Mr. Gray if you want, but if the name makes you think of those sexy books too much, you could just keep calling me Abe. One of my favorite names, bestowed upon my kind centuries ago, one of the oldest, is Abaddon. Abe for short, Vaughn whispered.
So was everything you told me a lie? Looking for someone new to operate this place? Do I have to sign a contract in my blood and you take my soul or something? Abe tilted his head back and roared with laughter.
Nothing so dramatic. Look, maybe I fibbed a little. I don't know if any human will have the wherewithal to actually take over this operation. So far, I've tried many, many times, and not a single one can handle it.
Then why do it? Abe leaned forward, clapped his hands in delight.
Why not?
Vaughn shook his head as if to clear it, but there was no clearing away the image of the younger man standing in front of him. There was no changing or denying the fact the room kept changing around him as Abe talked and moved. Abe sighed.
When you've lived as long as I have, you have to find ways to pass the time, to abuse yourself. You humans are so much fun.
Vaughn shook his head. You keep changing the reason. One thing 1 minute, another the next.
And that's what will keep it interesting.
Abe smiled. Look, I just need to know the truth, Vaughn said. I don't give a fuck about becoming the librarian or if you're Satan, whatever. At this point, you're probably just a figment of my imagination. I just need to see my wife's book. I need to know. Abe stopped laughing, but the smirk stayed on his face. Ah, yes, the lovely Judy. Some suspicions, eh? There are always suspicions. You humans are so predictable with the love thing. Always a sore spot and an easy button to push. Abe extended his right hand and snapped his fingers. The area behind the counter suddenly lit up bright, and the shelves moved and swirled until one book floated off the end of a metal bookshelf. Slowly, it tumbled its way through the air to land on Abe's palm. Once there, the lights in the room with the bookshelves went dim, and Abe offered the book to Vaughn. Here it is, Vaughn, Abe said. But as Vaughn reached for it, he pulled it back again. You have to be sure now. You have to be sure you want to know what's in here. Remember, there's no turning back once you open the book. If you want, I can erase any memory of this place right now. Just walk out and you'll forget about it. But if you take the book, you're locked in. No turning back. What kind of fucked up rules are these? Vaughn asked, sweat beading on his forehead. My rules. My place, my rules. What fun would this be without rules? Vaughn stared at the book. In his head, the buzzing and fuzziness had turned into a pounding desire. There was a small voice in his head telling him he had to know. Take the goddamn book, Vaughn, it said. Take it, find out, then deal with it. Time is ticking, my friend, Abe said, the smile still on his face and no trace of annoyance in his voice. Infuriatingly, the creature, sounded amused by all of this. I'm gonna have to put this away soon and then erase your memory after all. There's no shame in it. Some people cannot handle the inner workings of another human's mind. The mind is a hole through which good and bad pour through. The thoughts of the universe traverse the brain. Evil and good mix and mingle like date night. The end result can be as horrific, as gory as a traffic accident. Can you just give me a hint? Vaughn asked desperately, wiping at the moisture on his forehead. Where would the fun be in such a thing? Abe said, as if admonishing a child. Besides, do you honestly think I know all of the thoughts in all of these books? There'd be no need for books if such were the case. Now, I have my own suspicions about the fair Judy. So I mentioned you should watch your wife in the first place, but I don't know for certain. Take it, or don't. Decide. Before he even realized his hands had moved, Vaughn snatched the book out of Abe's hands. He didn't see the smile widen on Abe's face, well past where a normal smile would have ended. The creature's lips pulled back until the ends of its mouth nearly met the corners of its eyes. The eyes burned yellow, and the iris became a vertical slit like those of a cat. Good, Abe whispered. Vaughn took the book to the counter and laid it down flat. In an instant, he flipped rapidly through the pages. It seemed no matter what page he stopped on, there were graphic descriptions of sex. It was as if every page was filled with agonizing details of Judy's sex escapades and her every thought related to it. Vaughn wiped his eyes and felt tears against his eyelids. Why is it like this? He asked. Abe came around the edge of the room, almost blending into the shadows along the wall. The books contain every passing thought from every person. Imagine trying to look at computer programming and seeing just an endless, constant stream of ones and zeros. If you were to stare at raw, unorganized thoughts, you'd go insane. Remember the jumble you saw when you first looked at your mother's book? This is what raw thought looks like. Your brain and the book merge, and it organizes itself based on your needs. You came in here wanting to know if your wife was fucking another man. The book is showing you every man or woman she ever had a sexual moment with. The biggest, best porn you will ever read. Vaughn bit his lower lip and flipped the pages to near the end. He could feel the book getting bigger as he did so. Judy was adding thoughts so fast, new pages were being created as he turned the pages. He slammed the book back down and stared. There it was. The day she met Ron was the day Vaughn had to work late. He was working an event at his place of business and had to stay there late into the night to help set up and then clean up. Judy had gone out to the grocery store, of all things, when Ron approached her. He was a maintenance man, still wearing a uniform with his name over his left breast. Younger, blonde, with piercing blue eyes. He smiled, she smiled, and then the flirting commenced. Because she had been home first, she wasn't wearing her wedding ring. While Vaughn was working away, schmoozing with clients and then stacking chairs, Judy was having a drink with Ron. All of this started a year ago. They didn't hook up that night, but they did the following weekend when Judy told Vaughn she was meeting a friend for lunch, right in Ron's car in a goddamn parking lot. From then on, it had been lunchtime visits and lots of phone or FaceTime stuff, with the two of them meeting up in hotel and motel rooms as frequently as they could. It seemed they were insatiable when together. Judy felt 20 years younger. She felt wanted. Vaughn felt both anger and sadness vying for supremacy within him for several moments. He slammed both fists down on the counter and tipped his head back to scream into the air. Then he picked up the book and threw it across the room, where it rebounded off the wall.
Hey, that's valuable merchandise, pal.
Abe said, but there was humor in his voice.
I'm guessing you know something for certain now. Something bad.
I can't believe she'd do that to me. Vaughn spat through clenched teeth. Hot tears ran down his face. How could she do that to me? Abe strolled over, the hint of a smile on his lips. He put a hand on Vaughn's shoulder.
Hey, sorry, buddy,
he said, but sounded anything but sorry. His tone was mocking.
Look, you wanted to know. See, this is why you'd be perfect for working here. No attachments now, right? You can just leave her.
Vaughn stared at the man beside him. Abe's eyes flashed red for a moment, then became green gold. I can't just leave her, he said. I can't let her do this. I have to talk to her. She means everything to me. Abe laughed loud and long.
I'm offering you the chance of a lifetime here, Vaughn. You can come work here. The rest of the world will go on, albeit much slower than you think. I can arrange it so the rest of the world thinks you died or just vanished. They'll move on. You can watch them deal with it right from their books. Your in-laws, your wife, friends. I'm telling you, the deal is on the table. Earlier you said the offer changes, but it's not true. I need you. I need humans. You can be part of this.
Vaughn clenched and unclenched his fists. He shook his head, then nodded, then muttered to himself. He walked back to the book, flipped to the end. Didn't take him long to find the thoughts from this afternoon. Oh my God, I have to call Ron. I need to hear his voice. Oh, I have to remember how he felt the last time. He felt so good inside me the last time. I have to get away from this. I have to get away from my parents before I start screaming, and I especially have to get away from Vaughn. Him and his fucking books, wandering around a goddamn library where he can't even check out any of the books. So disconnected. Ron's not disconnected. So into me, so ready for me, listens to me. I wonder if we can leave here early. I need to get back to him. I need to see him. I want to see him, standing there, naked, waiting for me. So eager. I need it. Vaughn stopped there. Sure enough, she had called Ron while standing in the parking lot, in full view of everyone in the restaurant and even himself. The way she smiled as she talked. The pause where she seemed lost in thought, touching the edge of the phone to her lips as if giving it a kiss. Vaughn screamed again, clutching both sides of his head, clumps of his own hair between his fingers.
I can see you have some unresolved issues here,
Abe said, still sounding so amused.
Look, I get it. Sometimes you just can't make a clean break. So what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do before you come back here? There's so much more to see, Vaughn. There are books there which will blow your mind. You're being too narrow, but I get it. It's hard to let it all go, no matter what the cartoon princess says in her song. If you can release this and get away from it, maybe you can still work here. You must shed the things holding you back to work here. This place is about knowledge.
That's bullshit, Vaughn said through his hands, still covering his face.
You know it's bullshit.
This is a game to you. None of this is real, and the offer will vanish once I do what you say.
Abe looked wounded. No, you misunderstand me. I need you, Vaughn. I need someone like you at the very least. The passion you show, the devotion you have toward her. Only someone truly in love would have such rage. I've been looking for a long time now. I need to know if you can handle managing this place.
Vaughn waved his hand at Abe. He didn't want to hear anything the man was saying at this point. Instead, he imagined wrapping his hands around Judy's neck. Even better, he imagined punching this Ron guy, then stomping on his head while wearing steel-toed boots. The satisfying crunch his skull would make when it caved in beneath his feet. Ron was back home, though. The book seemed to show it was Judy who first had the idea of flirting with a stranger. It was she who decided this was what she wanted to do. This was her infidelity. Ron was a kid making a stupid mistake and being seduced by an older woman.
Hey now, don't go off into misogyny land here.
Abe cooed as if reading his mind.
It takes two parties for this to happen. Look, I said it before and I'll say it again a few seconds later. Take care of things if you feel you must.
Abe reached into his pocket. There was an odd buzzing in the air, a slight crackling of energy. Then he removed his hand, and inside was a small pistol. It was just barely bigger than Vaughn's hand, an automatic of some kind. Abe held it out to him.
Take it, if you must,
Abe said.
Take care of things, but be warned. I can't help you if you get caught. You can come back here when it's done and we can see about the job I offered you, but if you get caught, you have to deal with it yourself. Her parents are in the house. There's 7 bullets in this thing. Just 7. No more. Make them count.
Vaughn stared at the gun for a long moment. His mouth felt dry and his hands were conversely sweating profusely. Was he really going to take the gun? The sides were silver. The handle was white. The more he stared at it, the more beautiful the gun became. He could feel it in his hands. He could imagine what it would feel like going off. The surprised look Judy would give when she realized he had fired. She'd have the merest fraction of a second to realize he meant business and that it would be over for her. Vaughn grabbed the pistol and shoved it into his pocket. Abe stepped aside and let him pass. Before he even realized he was doing it, Vaughn ran down the stairs. Behind him, he heard Abe's laughter, deep, resonant, inhuman, echoing down the stairwell. It sent chills down his spine, but then he was through the door, and the sound stopped. Can too much knowledge cause a man to lose his sanity? Will a normally rational man be driven to perform irrational deeds if he learns too much about those around him? Listen to the end of this man's tale next week as he finds himself once again in the hidden library when the night comes out. You've been listening to When the Night Comes Out, a weekly horror anthology podcast with stories by Brian W. Alaspa and narrated by Allie James. For Brian's work, visit his website at www.brianwalaspa.com or visit amazon.com for his books of fiction and nonfiction. Be sure to listen to Allie's work on Facebook at Allie James Projects.